Hello and welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. Today in our part 2 of our discussion on the criminalization of politics and the judgment, we'll take ahead the discussion, also speak on the topic of should political parties be brought under RTI and will that change a lot of things, and of course other parts of the judgment. To discuss this judgment, I have with me Advocate Arshdeep Singh Khurana, Advocate Gaurav Gupta, Advocate Amit Singh Chauhan and Advocate Ankur Khandelwal. Welcome all of you, and let's begin our part 2 of this discussion. Amit, now, in the judgment, there was some bit of reference to political parties being brought under the Right to Information Act. Do you see any reason why political parties are resisting this, or will they have a valid reason for resisting this?
I don't know about a valid reason or not, but as I had mentioned in the last episode, there needs to be clarity in their functioning. Right now, they are operating to somewhat secrecy how decisions are taken. Plus, whether they are brought under RTI, because already a judgment, as we were discussing with Gaurav, like, by the ADR, they moved a petition, and on that they said that it's not a public political party is not a public authority. But I essentially believe they're an essential part of this, democracy, because democracy or the principles of the Constitution are implemented through these political parties. They're essential to the functioning. So I believe they should be brought in. But right now, I don't think there is any law which make sure that they are within the RTI. Even there was still some time back regarding the foreign funding as well. There were issues, and the judgment to that extent said, basically it has to be RBI and FEMA compliance, nothing else. So even the courts, or I would say certain hesitancy has been there of how the functioning, whether the functioning should be more transparent or not. But I firmly believe it should. They form an essential part of this constitutional democracy and are essential to the implementation of the principles enshrined in our Constitution.
Okay. How would you look at it, Arshdeep?
I think, Tarun, the question of whether political parties should be within the ambit of RTI, I think that's one of the most important questions right now, which needs to be addressed. That's a core problem which we are facing in the country. The political parties are completely opaque. We don't know what happens there. The reason is that they're not within the RTI Act. I think my opinion on this is very clear that they should come within the RTI Act. They are political parties deal with public issues. They are the parties whose members are going to form the government, members are going to legislate, they are going to be dealing with the public. So I think this issue of public authority has to be enlarged, the concept of public authority. The political parties have to come within and they have to be open. End of the day, we are talking about whether the criminal antecedents of the politicians, of the persons who are fighting the election have to come out. So therefore, the public parties should also come out in the open. And what are they scared about? If they are clean, their systems are clean, then they should come out and they should themselves say that, all right, we should be within the RTI Act. You please ask us questions and we will answer them.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my opinion.
So in all fairness, they should
absolutely.
Gaurav, how would you look at this?
When you're talking about funding, you're talking about a completely different beast altogether, which is the overall electoral reforms. Of course, there's no way that any sensible or a reasonable person who's not a politician would say that they should not come under the ambit of RTI. If you hold yourself out saying, I want to govern you, of course we want to know not just your antecedents, but where you've been and where you intend to take us. I'll just give an analogy. Even a person, even an individual who's looking to contest an election discloses everything about his assets, his sources of earning, his receipts, everything he has to disclose, his spouse, his dependent income. So if an individual can do it, why can't a political party do it? See, the problem is when it comes to utmost transparency, there's been an abhorrence and resistance not just from the political class, the judiciary also, if I may say this with some respect, its tables are not entirely clean. You remember the judgment of Justice Shah in 2009 in the Supreme Court, in the judgment where it was to be decided whether Supreme Court should come, the Chief Justice of India, his office should come under the RTI or not. So Justice Shah gave a very emphatic judgment saying that CJI should come under the ambit of the RTI. What has happened to the judgment almost 10 years hence? The appeal is still pending in the Supreme Court. Although out of good conscience, a lot of judges have put up their assets on the websites, but it's still,
out of good conscience,
it's not out of compulsion. Therefore, resistance has to come from all quarters. What we are talking about is overall electoral reform. Therefore, I am not very optimistic, although I would love to see that.
But you would also then say that you're not agreeing with the electoral bonds which are coming out, which will make who's putting money into which political party a very opaque thing.
No, it will not. It will not help matters in any which way. Obviously, it's being brought in after a well thought out strategy.
But would it also mean that you definitely don't know who's pumping in money into which party and for what reasons?
Absolutely.
Today we don't know who's
pumping. That is really not the cure.
But the bonds make it totally
That is
opaque.
really not the cure. It could be a case of the medicine being worse than the cure.
Okay. The medicine being worse than the cure. Ankur, your comments on this?
I think that the legal regime with respect to political parties should be tightened for sure. And there, of course, has to be more regulation with respect to who's pumping money into the political parties, whether it's coming from offshore, if it's the offshore money or if it's domestic money. All of those things have to be tightened for sure. But whether you bring the political parties within or outside, you keep political parties within or outside the RTI regime is a question that I'd leave the judiciary to answer. The reason being that in the internal mechanics of a political party is really its business. What concerns the public at large is who they are electing to power. And therefore, you can have regulations to ensure that the candidates who are contesting elections have a thorough background check done. The criminal antecedents are put out in the public. The money that is coming into the political parties is scrutinized. And therefore, there has to be a legal regime that controls and governs and regulates the political parties, a system which is similar in many ways to the system that we have in Germany and Japan, where political parties are under constant scrutiny. However, with respect to the internal dynamics that take place within, you may or may not want to keep it under the RTI regime, because that really is the business of the political parties.
Okay. Amit, would you then call out the electoral bonds? You're not in agreement with it?
I'm not in agreement. Do you know the expenditure? I think this is an ex-election commissioner saying 150,000 crores to 250,000 crores. That was the expenditure in the 2014 elections.
150,000 crores to 250,000
crores. All the elections from panchayat level to, I'm talking about 2000 and subsequent elections.
So you mean we are making the system more opaque?
We are making the system more opaque than it already is. There is under-reporting of the expenses, who's funding. You might show it as a volunteer funding the car or he's providing his car, but at the end of the day, people are not blind. They know how things are run in this country, and probably overhauling of the electoral process is required. Probably state-sponsored elections. That has been proposed by, I think, various reports.
So Arshdeep, would you also take the same view?
I think the funding has to come out in the open. Who's funding political parties, people have a right to know.
And you mean these bonds make it more opaque?
They do.
They do. And you think it's not in the interest?
It's not in the interest. And
does it give advantage to someone?
Well, today we can't really judge whether it's going to give an advantage to somebody or not. Yeah. The bottom line, what I feel is that who is funding the political party, whether it's foreign funding, Indian funding.
Because I am curious only for one reason, yes. And you all as lawyers would know NGOs funding has been called out that it should be in the public domain.
That's right.
If NGOs can be funded with motivation, why not political parties?
Absolutely. Why can't? You have business houses today who fund political parties. They are obviously doing it for a purpose, and people have a right to know who's funding the political
and
party.
Foreign funding?
Foreign funding, of course, yes. There are issues of national security. We don't know who's...
So issues of national security?
Absolutely. Which foreign country, which foreign national, which multinational is funding a political party. The people have a right to know that.
Okay. So this is a serious issue which has been unaddressed. Let's see if the court's addressed in future, but we'll take this discussion ahead. So the Supreme Court then stopped short of debarring those charged with heinous crimes from contesting polls. In its wisdom, why did the Supreme Court take such a decision and not bar people? Did the Supreme Court think that we want to be behind the Lakshman Rekha, or did it think that there is a chance that people might be fixed in false cases just to get them debarred? Gaurav, would these be the things in the crossing the judge's mind when they stopped short of debarring?
Tarun, what I believe, I can't put myself in the judge's shoe and the judge's mind. Yeah. What perhaps weighed with them, see this mob mentality and people baying for blood and asking for conviction to trigger.
Yes.
At either the stage of filing the charge sheet, taking cognizance of framing charges. Yeah. All of that sounds good in theory. But when you look at the practical reality and when you look at the legal reality, in our country, please take it in writing, the charges are for the asking. Even if you have the strongest case possible, yes, discharge is a myth. Even in the strongest of cases, charges are par for the course and they are for the asking, and charges do get framed. Secondly, as far as cases like rape are concerned, what is the situation of law on the stage of framing of charges? All that you need is an allegation. As long as an allegation is there, it doesn't matter whether there is any corroborative evidence. You don't need to test the evidence or not. Only the fact that there is a prima facie allegation, the charge will be framed of such offences based on the mere allegation.
This is a good reason for court not to
This is a good reason.
Okay, okay. So in its wisdom, the court has decided not to debar. Ankur, your comment.
Well, while I agree that that's one of the major reasons why the Supreme Court stopped short of debarring, there are various issues other than these. Of course, one is the whole concept of who can legislate. It's only the parliament in matters of disqualification of candidates. That being one major consideration. The consideration of false cases is a major one, not just with respect to offences against person, but also offences against property. So there could be many charges framed in commercial matters that would involve the candidates, and they would be languishing only because false charges have been framed by people who are not even politicians, who are their business partners. That being one. The other consideration is that, as I said, the journey of a criminal trial ends with either conviction or acquittal. What happens in the interregnum when charges have been framed and the trial results in acquittal? You are essentially taking away the statutory right of a candidate to contest elections even when he was finally going to be acquitted. So these considerations, I think, weighed heavy with the Supreme Court.
Just to add one more point, I believe NCRB or someone else came out with the data that immediately before the elections, you see a spike in the number of allegations or FIRs against people who are prospective candidates.
So which is
so the trend is very clear. Many of the cases are malicious, motivated, and many of these FIRs are in relation to heinous crimes like murder, rape, and kidnapping. So let us understand the trend before baying for blood of these legislators.
Okay, that's an important point, that candidates, prospective candidates, may be framed with ulterior motives by various entities or criminals, or they are competitors. The incumbent government, who in whatever states the incumbent might want to bar. So there could be so many reasons with different political parties. But I think in its wisdom, then court stopped short of debarring. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Just before the break, we discussed why the court stopped short of debarring candidates against whom charges are framed from contesting polls. We'll take this discussion ahead. The court recommended that Parliament urgently enact a strong law that makes it obligatory for political parties to remove leaders charged with heinous and grievous crimes, such as rape, murder, kidnapping, to name a few, and refuse ticket to offenders both in parliamentary and assembly polls. The nation eagerly awaits such legislation, the court told Parliament. I would like to add one more thing. We concentrating on rapes and murders. What about corporate crimes? People having been charged of engineering, corporate siphoning of money. The world has changed in many ways, and white-collar crimes, in fact, affect a lot more people than an immediate crime. Though we're not trivializing murder as crime, but for a person who's looted crores, siphoned off money, even those crimes, are they called out for attention, or we are too focused on crimes of the street? Amit, your comment on both.
I agree. There are judgments of the Supreme Court calling these such mass frauds as economic terrorism. And we cannot trivialize them because they're not affecting one single man or one single family. They are affecting thousands of families at the same time.
Yes.
Even though murder and rape are serious offenses, but the amount of moral turpitude involved, cheating 1,000 people, not one act or two acts. The thousands of people are not involved.
We don't take such crimes into account. In the media will focus on a murder or a rape, but not such crimes.
They do. Off late, you will see you have all, the creative accounting is there, shell companies are being formed, and media has also got smart. They can now trace down the companies back. They say it's in Mauritius or Seychelles or anywhere, but
So you mean that also needs to be called out?
It needs to be called out.
Arshdeep, your comments?
I think white-collar crime is the biggest problem in the country right now.
Yes.
It is, a lot of judgments of the Supreme Court recognize it. The fact that a white-collar crime is conducted with a cool, calculated mind, as opposed to a heinous crime like a murder.
And those people could be flourishing in politics.
Absolutely. And you also have to understand, a person who commits a white-collar crime is also benefited from those proceeds of crime. He has that money available with him to fight the legal battle, to do other things. So therefore, white collar crime and therefore looking into funding of political parties is very important.
So Arshdeep, if you handle a lot of these cases, could you share with us that does a lot of attention get focused on a rape or a murder, a guy who's been charged with it, as opposed to a politician who siphoned off money?
It doesn't. So therefore, a lot of attention today is going on all these offences, but white collar crimes which are prevalent today in the society.
Yes.
You have corporate crimes, you have, like you said, shell companies, you have money laundering. I think money laundering is the biggest problem in the country.
But that doesn't become an election issue.
It doesn't, but it has to, because you will have to, therefore, if you look at the funding, maybe there are issues of money laundering there.
So the court should also look at this?
Absolutely, they have to, and you have to look at where the money is coming from, how it has travelled, where it has gone, which are the companies involved. So there are major issues as far as white collar crimes are concerned, and they have to be looked into with great detail.
So as we see, the panel also feels that these crimes need to be looked into, as you have kept an eye on rape and murder convicts, but what about white collar crime? Because as elections approach, there may be a lot of criticism on a hoodlum who rapes or murders these kind of people, but what about people who do white collar crimes? Gaurav, do you think white collar crime now needs to be called out? Media attention also we see is a lot many times focused on a rape or a murder, but not people who mastermind white collar crimes and loot billions.
I completely agree with Arshdeep when he says that this is the biggest problem facing us. I mean, that has to be an understatement when we say that it's the biggest problem facing us. In the last so many decades, the politicians have run the country dry with financial crimes and economic offenses, and all of our money. We used to be a 23% contributor to the world's GDP, and look where we are today. All because our coffers have been sucked dry by the politicians, and all the politicians keep sitting on our money, and we look at these very same politicians for doles, for mercies, that please give us some mercy of food grains, of TV, of various other things. So of course financial crime has to be put on the highest possible pedestal, even more than...
It's now upon the judiciary and the lawyers also to put this right back. I don't ignore the media when I say this, to put this back into the headline.
Yes, of course, judiciary has to play a major role. In fact, sometime in the earlier part of the year, Justice Nariman gave a very good judgment in Asian Resurfacing Roads, where he said that what are the kind of cases under the Prevention of Corruption Act that can be stayed, and when you give a stay, it can only operate for 6 months. So there is no question of a person who's charged of an offense, takes a stay, sits pretty in his house for 20 years, by the time he dies or the money trail is lost. Therefore now, of course, the judiciary has to play a very, very vital role, and it's only by judgments like these, thumping judgments like these, can you set the house in order.
That's a good point. Ankur, your point on this?
So the reason why I think crimes against person have gained so much attention, they gained so much attention right before the elections, is because they shock the conscience, as opposed to maybe white collar crimes. And white collar crimes, as he said, is an epidemic almost, which of course runs deep into the political system. A very important aspect of that is that the political parties really want the money and therefore indulge in all these things. It's a vicious cycle which can never be traced, because the oppositions also don't want to call out such acts of the other party, because they are also deeply embedded in something like that, as opposed to crimes against person, which really shocks which shock the conscience of the people right before the elections. And we are talking about people not just in the urbanized areas of the country, but also in the rural areas, where perhaps the understanding of white collar crime is not that easy. So given the whole gamut of these factors, I think white collar crimes are somewhere ignored, and they don't get the glare they deserve.
So it clearly says that it is all upon us, the lawyers, the judiciary and the media, to put white collar crime where it belongs, right at the center of the discussion. Because we all have noticed that before elections, you might be calling out a rape and a murder victim, but people who has, a politician who has siphoned off billions or millions or whatever it may be, and harmed much more than say 1 or 2 crimes, has not been called out. But I'll take this discussion ahead. The Supreme Court also quoted the Mumbai serial bomb blasts and said that criminalization of politics is akin to termite to the citadel of democracy, and quoted Mumbai serial bomb blasts investigations reports of the N.N. Vohra Committee and the Law Commission to emphasize the criminal justice system was unable to deal with the unholy criminal politician bureaucrat and police nexus. This is what the judgment said. If I may add, there is a lawyer nexus to it also. Amit, would you agree?
I don't know about the lawyer nexus, but I'm sure there are very smart lawyers all around. As regards this nexus, say Ramachandra Guha in India after Gandhi says that in the 1970s, there was the first time when administrative appointments were taken over by probably political parties, or the nexus of bureaucracy and the political parties came into being, which started, at such a small stage, is now almost an epidemic in this country. And even coming back to your white collar crimes thing, Tarun, there are laws in this country which are not properly implemented. Say Section 218, if I remember correctly, of the CRPC, which says that only 3 offences of the same kind can be tried together. When you're cheating thousands of people, there's no need for a single charge sheet.
Okay.
You can punish them for every 3 kinds of offences can be tied together, and say you have punishments in abroad, say of 100 years, 150 years, that there is law in India, but they're not implemented. People take it very lax manner, and the investigating agencies need to be educated. I feel that we lack, our investigating agencies are subpar when it comes to economic or sophisticated crimes.
They don't have the required specialization like chartered accountants, doctors or physicists.
Yes, I agree. And coming back to this nexus which you were talking about, it's prevalent. You scratch my back, I scratch your back. If I'm getting something, I expect something in return.
Supreme Court has called out the nexus.
Yes, it's got highlighted after the 93 bomb blast. So
I'll quote further and go to Arshdeep after that. Chief Justice of India Deepak Mishra further said that criminalization of politics was never an unknown phenomenon in the Indian political system. But its presence was felt in the strongest form during the 1993 Mumbai bomb blast, which was a result of collaboration of a diffused network of criminal gangs, police, customs officials and their political patrons. Arshdeep, your comment.
Okay, let me first deal with the issue of, you were saying whether lawyers are part of the nexus. I don't think so, because the lawyers come into the picture when the crime gets called.
Yeah.
So therefore, I don't think, as far as this nexus is concerned, obviously it's prevalent. I think the biggest problem right now in the country, and as far as the criminal justice system is concerned, is, like he said, is the investigation issue. We lack the requisite police force to investigate. We lack professionals to investigate. There are no CAs as far as economic offences are concerned.
But of course, CBI can hire a CA. I mean,
they do, and they are doing that. But
yes,
still, the way the magnitude of the offence is there, you don't have enough, force or professionals to deal with the situation.
If I may interrupt,
yes.
Is the problem that when a sub-inspector is tasked with investigating a policy matter taken by a minister or a bureaucrat, he's not competent enough to investigate that kind of a case?
The problems are, one is of competency, of course. The other problem is the number of cases which are there in. Like, I was once talking to an investigating officer, and he said the whole day we are in the court. Yes. Dealing with cases. 4:30, 5 o'clock, we go back to a police station or to our office, and we have to investigate 6 to 7 cases every day, which is just not humanly possible.
Yes.
So I think they need to come out with a system where the prosecution is made strong. The prosecutors have to take part of the investigating process.
Yes.
They have to be there with the investigators to guide them, because ultimately all these cases are going to go to court.
Yes.
And a number of cases don't end up into a conviction because of the lack of a proper investigation.
Yes.
So I think the investigation is and people thrive because they know, criminals thrive because they know the investigation is not going to happen in a proper way.
Okay.
And obviously all of this is a part of a nexus.
So as Arshdeep said, he called out the criminal police and the bureaucrat nexus. I'll also read that what bench quoted from the Bohra committee. It said that the Bohra committee had submitted its report on October 5, 1993, containing inputs from CBI, IB, RAW, which were unanimous that criminal networks are virtually running a parallel government. The Bohra committee also expressed concern that over the past few years, several criminals had been elected to local bodies, state assemblies and parliament, indicating a worrying picture, because it's not uncommon for us to see or hear news reports of our politicians talking across the border with criminals and warlords and gangsters. And this kind of nexus actually really puts out the good man away from politics, and the good man or an honest citizen of India would be deterred from even interacting or being associated with such people. Be that as it may, the problems which Arshdeep, Amit, Gaurav all have pointed out regarding the competency or how competent our investigators are. First, do they have the time, or they spend all their time in courts? We'll have to see whether the Supreme Court or the other courts deal with such issues. We will track this. But thank you so much for joining us on this 2-part episode on the criminalization of politics judgment. Thank you.